It's getting to that time of year when you're probably having to do longer miles on your bike, and then training throughout your session is going to be necessary. And yes, you do have the option of pre-packaged bars, gels, energy drinks, etc. But have you ever thought about making your own homemade fuel to take with you on your ride? Well, today we're going to be covering a very simple recipe that doesn't even involve any baking. I'm going to be making some raw food energy balls that will provide you with protein, fats, carbohydrates, and even a little bit of fibre. Right then, before we get started, I should cover very quickly what you need. And yes, no oven is required, but you do need a blender, a fairly sturdy one, because it's got to get through nuts and through dates. Possibly a saucepan if your coconut oil is a little bit hard, because you'll want to melt that if it's somewhere a little bit chilly. Then a board for laying the balls on afterwards, and some bowls, and a tablespoon for measuring, and a cup of some sort for measuring your ingredients as well. And now, most importantly, onto the ingredients. And you're going to require 100 grams or half a cup of whole almonds. I personally use the ones with the skin on because it's a little bit more fibre. 100 grams or half a cup of cashew nuts. Then 200 grams or 1 cup of dates, preferably medjool dates, and I'll talk more about those in a moment. Then 200 grams or a cup of raisins or dried apricots, it's entirely up to you. 4 tablespoons of raw cacao powder, and then 2 tablespoons of coconut oil that needs to be a soft consistency so it can mix in with the ingredients, and then 2.5 tablespoons of almond butter. And then finally, for rolling your balls in, you want a little bit of spare raw cacao powder or some desiccated coconut. Okay, if you're somewhere warm, you won't need to worry about this, but if your coconut oil is a little bit hard and more like coconut fat, then you're going to need to melt it slightly. So I've already put this in the saucepan, melted it, but you don't want it to be too hot, so just put that to one side whilst you're getting everything else ready and leave that for a moment. And the same for pre-preparation comes with the dates. Now, I did say ideally medjool dates because they are, as they come off the tree, they're fresh. They're not actually a dried fruit, which is something I didn't know. Okay, moving on to the nuts, it's now time to get blitzing. So I have half a cup of cashews and half a cup of almonds in here ready to go, and I'm just simply going to place them into this blender. Now, I personally prefer to use something like this rather than a NutriBullet or a liquidizer, because I find the nuts get a little bit stuck in the bottom if you are using something like that. Now, obviously, it's up to you quite how ground you want your nuts, and I have cheated in the past when I've had a blender that was struggling, and I've actually used some ground almonds, so they're pretty much ready-made. But if you can do them like this, you get a little bit more texture, and again, it is your choice. And the same with nuts. You can mix in some other nuts. Cashews are great for sort of holding things together because there's just the texture works really well in these balls. I use almonds as well, but you could put in some pecans or walnuts, which are really nutritious. So have a little bit of an experiment and use what nuts you like, really. Okay, now you're just going to put those nuts back into the bowl and leave them to one side. You can even add in, if you wanted, some oatmeal or some oats and then ground them up. Depends on the texture, but that's the great thing about these. You can experiment with what you like, and like I said, which nuts you have. But it's worth noting, the drier the mixture, so the more ground it is, then the more it'll absorb liquid-wise, so you might need to compensate with a little bit more dried fruit or a little bit more coconut oil. It's all a little bit of an experiment, but I promise you, these do work. So I'm gonna leave that to one side now, and then it's time for the blender to do some hard work because it's got to get through this dried fruit. Now, I have soaked these dates a little bit, so hopefully the blender will be okay with that, but you don't really want to add in any water. So you can always add liquid later, but you can't really take it out. So it's probably best to strain them first if you have got lots of liquid in. I have spent many an hour having to do like a few dates at a time when I've only had a blender as opposed to a Magimix, and it is pretty time consuming and rather frustrating. So right, a bit of coconut oil that is actually still melted just about. So I'm going to pour that in. Okay, let's see if this little machine can cope with these dates. Okay, it is pretty sticky, but we're going to add in some almond butter in a moment, which will hopefully just help the blender finish off with its blending of the fruit. And it doesn't have to be into a completely smooth paste because a little bit of texture can be quite nice. So now it's time to add in the almond butter. And a tip with almond butter, always give it a good stir, because quite often you'll find the oil sits on top and you can end up with more oil in your ingredients than you want. So make sure it's nicely mixed up. You will find it actually starts to form a little bit more of a paste once you've added the almond butter. So now it's time to add in the raw cacao powder. You can actually get away with that even using any raw cacao powder if you don't like the flavour of chocolate, or you want to keep them a little bit less on the sort of sweeter side, I suppose. But when you've got the opportunity, why not add a little bit of healthy chocolate flavour, I say. Okay, it's about 3 tablespoons so far, but I'm going to give it a bit of a blend and see how that comes out, because obviously we have to add the nuts back in a moment. Okay, that looks like a pretty delicious gooey paste. Now it's time to add in the nuts, and once I've added the nuts I might have to change the consistency slightly, but we'll see how it deals with this. That's if the blender can cope with it. Now, as you can see, it's struggling a little bit. Now, at this stage, if you do have a fairly small machine and you've got quite a lot of ingredients, you can always just take it out into a big bowl and use a spoon and use a bit of elbow grease to get there. I reckon we can add the rest of that raw cacao powder, which makes me happy. But that's why I just added the 3 tablespoons to start with, because you can then wait and see a little bit as to how the texture is turning out. So just add in 1 more spoonful and see how this comes out. I think we are pretty much there. And it's quite a good idea. You can only sort of tell so much from stirring to actually just take a little bit of mixture when it gets a bit messy. And obviously, as you can see, they are very greasy on the outside, so you just want to cover them with something to kind of seal them. I've got 2 options here. I've got some raw cacao powder in a bowl that I've prepared earlier, and also some desiccated coconut. You could also use some ground nuts. If you ground a few extra at the beginning, you could roll it in that, but we're going to just use these 2 today. And then just roll them around a little bit so they're nicely coated, and pop them on the tray that you've got ready made. The consistency is key here. So as much as there is an ingredients list, everything does vary a little bit, so make sure they do roll nicely and then just sort of stick together like this. And the great thing about these, you can stick them in the freezer to make sure they set nicely, but you can also leave them in the freezer and they'll keep for, I guess, 6 months or so. Mine never get to keep that long because I must admit I eat them before then. And also, if you are somewhere warm, hard to imagine right now, but if you put them in the freezer, and you can take them straight from the freezer and put them in your jersey pocket, so that by the time you get to that stage in your ride where you're a little bit hungry, they're probably going to be a perfect consistency before getting a little bit too runny. I know I've already mentioned that you don't have to stick exactly to these ingredients, but another thing, you could add in some instant coffee, as long as it's ground, and then mix that into the mixture, because it gives you that little bit of a caffeine hit when you're out on a ride. So then it really does encompass everything. And you might think that buying all these ingredients, such as dates, almond butter, coconut oil, is expensive, but a large pot of each of those goes a long way. And if you actually add up how often you buy an energy bar that's £2, $2, I think that's pretty much just one of these balls and how many you've got here. So value for money, plus you know exactly what is going into your nutrition. And when it comes to when to use, I have basically made these as cycling balls, and this is when I tend to use them. You can use them for running, but just remember that there's obviously dates and nuts. It takes a little bit longer to digest, and you might get a few GI issues if you're trying to go for a run straight after. But experiment, you know what works with you. And most importantly, enjoy. And talk of enjoying, you can even sneak these into maybe a supper party at the end. If you drizzle in some melted dark chocolate over the top, then it's a pretty healthy after supper snack to have with your coffee. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and more importantly, you've gone away and made some of these and enjoyed them. I know I'm going to. Give us a thumbs up like if you have. Click the globe to subscribe to make sure you get all of our videos. And if you do like some of the ingredients that's in this, we've made a video on superfoods for triathletes, including things such as raw cacao, and you can find that video just down here.